I don't even want to get to that part yet where it's competition based, but I want to stick to more everyday fueling, everyday habits that maybe they can instill into their weekly routine. And then how that, because in many ways, practice is no different than a race in some capacities, right? You're still putting forth a lot of effort in a amount of time. You got to properly fuel, but you also have to properly prep for that. So tell me a little bit about like some things for high school athletes that maybe they could get from what you're doing with the national team athletes and the elite of the elite. Like, what are some things that high school athletes could instill into their daily routine, or some big picture principles that they could, and then also how that relates to prepping for race day and the timing of their race and this and that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a little mnemonic that I use to remember this. And I would say that this applies to training and racing just the same. And this is the 5 R's. It's typically used around recovery, but really recovery is a 24-hour process in an endurance athlete because of how many times they train over the course of one day and over the course of a week. So, and I have a few webinars and podcasts out there on this, so I'm sure you could just Google my name and the 5 R's, and you'll hear me talking about this for a whole hour. The first R is to rehydrate. It's important to understand what your hydration status is on waking up and to try to stay hydrated throughout your school day, but also showing up to practice in a hydrated state. And that also means showing up to the starting block of a race in a hydrated state. So what does that mean? Well, the easiest way to look at it is your pee. The color, the volume, and the frequency of urine is a helpful tool in understanding whether or not you're hydrated. So if it's clear and you're peeing high volumes and more than once an hour, you're actually overhydrating and it's not often being absorbed very well. So that's why it just kind of comes right through out the other side. And then on the other side of that, we have dark urine that's low in volume and it's been more than 3 hours since you've used the bathroom. That's dehydrated, and likely you've been dehydrated for a while at that point. So what we really are aiming for is drinking enough fluid so that we're peeing roughly every 2 hours or so, a moderate volume and a pale yellow color. It's often that athletes wake up in the morning and they have slightly darker colored urine. Maybe if they, could have to do even with the climate of the room that you're sleeping in, the time of year. Maybe you had trouble hydrating over the course of that day. But that's a good opportunity to check in with yourself and identify what approaches you need to take in order to kind of regain that hydration status. And that can be so simple as drinking a glass of water when you wake up and having water with breakfast. Drinking fluids with meals helps absorb nutrients from the food, and then it also helps with fluid absorption. And just, different strategies that can allow you to continue drinking sort of smaller sips of water more frequently through the day. I also notice that athletes hyperfixate on drinking fluid around their training sessions. Maybe they're chugging fluid when they wake up in the morning and they're peeing a whole bunch right before they go out on the water. But then there's that period of the middle of the day when maybe you're in class, you're distracted, you're running errands, and you're not drinking enough or you're not drinking often. So it's really just kind of finding your vessel and, maybe even adding some flavorings to it, whether that's like mint cucumber or some type of a flavor profile that's going to motivate you to drink it. Maybe the temperature will motivate you to drink it more. Really just working on individualizing that. So that's the first R. The second one is to repair with protein. And I think most athletes understand the importance of protein on, recovery and training, but it also has really important functions with appetite regulation. And again, because recovery is a 24-hour process, the distribution of protein throughout the day is very important. And our protein needs don't change when we're training harder or less. We need to maintain the same frequency of eating a good solid dose of protein every 3 to 4 hours that we're awake. So I like to use the protein as sort of the foundation. It's the anchor of our meals and snacks. It's the thing that doesn't really shift with changes in training volume. But what does is the third R, and that is refueling. Now, carbohydrates are our primary fuel source for our brains. That includes when we're in school, and for our bodies. So the longer we work and the harder we work, the greater our reliance is on carbohydrate as a fuel source. When we don't get enough carbohydrate, it compromises in a short time frame the quality of training, mood, concentration, focus. But in a medium term time frame, it can influence things like our metabolism, our bone health, our physiology, our exercise adaptation, our relationship to food, our mood. So there's a really important link between adjusting carbohydrates up when we're training harder and getting the most out of our training. And I think that's the piece that a lot of endurance athletes struggle with. Part of that is the culture that we exist in now, where carbs and sugar kind of gets pegged as this evil villain, when really it is just so critically important to have that adequacy of carbohydrate and the availability of carbohydrate around sessions. So that's a really big one. The fourth R is to reinforce our immune function. And that's where a variety of different types of fats. Fat also helps us to meet our energy needs because it's an energy dense food. So when we're expending a lot of energy, incorporating different types of fats helps us meet that calorie need. And then colorful foods, they all have antioxidants that help reduce inflammation and accelerate that recovery process in a way that can just enhance the overall adaptations to training. And then we've got fermented foods. And those are probiotics, things like kefirs and kombucha and yogurt. Those have beneficial bacteria that have been shown to have significant impacts on an athlete population in addition to the general population. And they can help with our immune function. There's even some studies that show that it can improve aerobic capacity of some of endurance athletes. And probiotics are the live and active bacterial cultures in food that already exist in our gut. So when we consume probiotic-rich foods, we're actually reinforcing a population of beneficial bacteria that's already there that fights off pathogens. Even things like upper respiratory tract infections, we have a protection when we're consuming probiotic-rich foods. So all of these things combined makes our fifth R, which is to repeat. So we're focusing on being hydrated, spreading our protein intake out, adjusting our carbohydrate intake to meet the demands of training, reinforcing our immune function when we can with fats and colorful foods and ferments, and then we repeat that every 3 to 4 hours that we're awake over the course of the day.